know what's funny? Society loves to slap labels on people who choose silence over small talk. They call them unsocial, weird, broken, like there's something fundamentally wrong with someone who doesn't light up at the thought of weekend parties or group hangouts. But here's what nobody wants to talk about. Most loners didn't choose this life because they hate people. They chose it because people taught them that being alone was safer. And that, right there, is the part that makes everyone uncomfortable. Let me paint you a picture. There's this person, maybe you know them, maybe you are them. They don't talk much, they keep to themselves. When everyone's laughing and bonding over drinks or gossip, they're the ones sitting quietly in the corner. Not because they're judging anyone, but because they've learned something most people never had to learn. They've learned that people can be dangerous. Not the obvious kind of dangerous, not the movie villain type. No, the subtle kind. The kind that smiles in your face while tearing you down behind your back. The kind that says they love you right before criticizing everything about you. The kind that makes you feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for the next explosion. You see, loners aren't always born. Sometimes they're made. And the process, it's brutal. Here's where it gets interesting. Society has this obsession with extroversion, with being social, with having a massive friend circle, and posting pictures with captions like "blessed with the best" or "squad goals." And if you're not doing that, if you're not constantly surrounded by people, constantly engaging, constantly performing, then something must be wrong with you, right? Wrong. But society doesn't want you to know that. Because if people started questioning why they feel exhausted after every social gathering, why they feel drained instead of energized, the whole charade would fall apart. The lie that you need 100 friends to be happy would crumble. And then what? People might actually start listening to themselves instead of the noise around them. Can't have that. So instead, they pathologize solitude. They make it seem like choosing to be alone is some kind of personality defect. Like you're missing out on real life if you're not constantly plugged into the social matrix. But here's the kicker. Most of the people judging loners, they're miserable in their own social circles. They're just too scared to admit it. Let's dig into something specific. You know what creates a loner faster than anything else? Growing up in a home where nothing you did was ever good enough. Picture this. You bring home a report card with 5 A's and 1 B. Normal parents might celebrate the A's, right? But not yours. Why wasn't this an A? Your cousin got straight A's. What's wrong with you? Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was the way your dad looked at your body and made comments about your weight at the dinner table. Every single night, until you stopped eating in front of people altogether. Maybe it was your mom criticizing your clothes, your hair, your friends, your interests, everything that made you you, until you learned to hide every part of yourself just to avoid the next verbal assault. This is called chronic criticism. And it doesn't just hurt in the moment, it rewires your entire relationship with other people. Because when you grow up being told that everything about you is wrong, that you're too loud or too quiet, too fat or too skinny, too smart or too stupid, you start believing that being around people means being judged. And eventually you stop showing up at all. Not because you hate people, but because the exhaustion of constantly defending your existence is too much to bear. When you started doing that, when you started choosing to be alone rather than criticized, people called you problematic. They said you had an attitude. They never asked what made you build those walls in the first place. Here's something darker. Shame isn't just about criticism. It's about being made to feel fundamentally defective. Like there's something rotten at your core that everyone can see, except you tried so hard to hide it. Maybe you were the kid who got excited about something, a hobby, a passion, an interest, and your parents laughed at you. Not with you. At you. They mocked your enthusiasm until you learned that being excited about anything meant setting yourself up for humiliation. Or maybe you made a mistake. A normal human mistake, and instead of gentle correction, you got rage. You got the silent treatment. You got punished so severely that you learned mistakes weren't just wrong, they were unforgivable. This is how shame gets planted, deep in your bones, until you start believing that you are the mistake. And what happens when you carry that kind of shame? You avoid people, because being around them means they might see what you've been taught to believe about yourself. So you disappear. You become invisible. You master the art of being in a room without actually being present. And people call that unsocial. But you call it a choice. They never consider that it might be survival. Now let's talk about betrayal. Not the dramatic movie kind, the everyday kind that cuts deeper because you never saw it coming. You had a best friend. You told them everything, your fears, your dreams, your secrets. The stuff you didn't tell anyone else because you thought this person was safe. You thought this person got you. And then what happened? They told everyone. They used your vulnerabilities as entertainment. They took the most intimate parts of you and turned them into gossip, into jokes, into ammunition. Or maybe it was a partner. You loved them, you trusted them completely, and they cheated. And when you found out, they blamed you for it, said you weren't enough, said you drove them to it. Or maybe, and this one destroys people, it was a parent. The person who was supposed to protect you, teach you that the world is safe, show you what unconditional love looks like. And instead, they broke every promise they made. They were there when it was convenient and gone when you needed them most. They taught you that love comes with conditions and disappears when you stop meeting them. This is betrayal trauma. And it doesn't just hurt. It changes how you see every relationship that comes after. Because once you learn that the people closest to you can hurt you the worst, you stop letting people get close. You keep everyone at arm's length, not because you don't want connection, but because you're terrified of what happens when you let your guard down. You become cautious, distant, hypervigilant, always watching for red flags, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. And people wonder why you prefer being alone. It's simple. Being alone might seem lonely, but at least you can't be betrayed by yourself. Here's where it gets really ugly. You know what society loves to downplay? Bullying. They act like it's just kids being kids or something you should get over once you leave school. But here's the truth. Bullying doesn't just stay in the past. It lives in your body, in your nervous system, in the way you react to people even decades later. Maybe you were the kid who looked different, dressed different, talked different. And instead of that being celebrated, it made you a target. Every day became a nightmare of waiting to see who would mock you, trip you, humiliate you in front of everyone. Maybe you were the smart kid. And instead of that being seen as an asset, it made you the nerd that everyone loved to tear down. They made fun of how you talked, how you dressed, how you cared about school, until you learned that being intelligent meant being isolated. Or maybe you were just the odd one out. You didn't fit into the neat little boxes everyone else seemed to slot into naturally. You didn't like the same things. You didn't laugh at the same jokes. You didn't perform the same social rituals. And for that crime, the crime of being different, you were excluded, mocked, and made to feel like you didn't deserve to exist in the same space as everyone else. This is what bullying does. It teaches you that being yourself is dangerous, that authenticity leads to pain, that the safest thing you can do is disappear, and so you did. You stopped trying to fit in because every attempt ended in humiliation. You stopped raising your hand in class because being right meant being ridiculed. You stopped eating lunch with people because sitting alone was less painful than sitting with people who made you feel invisible anyway. When you started choosing isolation over humiliation, adults told you to toughen up. They said you were too sensitive. They never once considered that maybe the problem wasn't your sensitivity. Maybe the problem was that you were being tortured daily and nobody did a damn thing to stop it. And now, years later, when someone asks why you don't like social situations, you can't even explain it, because how do you tell them that every group setting triggers the memory of negativity, that every new person feels like a potential threat, that your body remembers what your mind tries to forget? You don't. You just say you prefer being alone, and they think you're weird. Now let's talk about something that really messes people up. Living in a high-conflict home, you know the kind, where you never knew what mood your parents would be in when you walked through the door, where the air was always thick with tension, where loud fights erupted out of nowhere, and you learned to make yourself small, quiet, invisible, just trying not to become collateral damage. Maybe your parents screamed at each other every night, doors slamming, dishes breaking, voices so loud you couldn't think. And you're just a kid, lying in bed, covering your ears, praying it would stop. Or maybe the volatility was directed at you. Your parent would be loving one moment and raging the next. You'd do the exact same thing 2 days in a row. Once it would be fine, once it would get you screamed at or worse. You couldn't predict it. You couldn't control it. You just learned to brace for impact. This is what therapists call walking on eggshells, but that phrase is too gentle. It was more like navigating a minefield while blindfolded. One wrong step and everything exploded. And what does that do to a kid? It teaches them that people are unpredictable and dangerous, that safety doesn't exist in relationships, that the only place you can truly relax is when you're completely alone. Because when you're alone, you don't have to monitor anyone's mood. You don't have to scan for warning signs. You don't have to prepare for sudden outbursts. Your nervous system finally gets to rest. So yeah, you became a loner. Not because you're unsocial, but because isolation became synonymous with peace, with safety, with control. And when people judge you for that, when they say you need to put yourself out there or stop isolating, they have no idea what they're asking. They're asking you to voluntarily walk back into a situation that feels exactly like the war zone you grew up in. No thanks. Here's a specific kind of trauma that people really don't talk about enough. Public humiliation. Not just being embarrassed, that's normal. We're talking about being deliberately humiliated by someone who had power over you. Someone who was supposed to protect you, guide you, or at the very least not destroy you in front of others. Maybe it was a teacher. You gave a wrong answer in class, and instead of gently correcting you, they mocked you. They made an example out of you. They let the entire class laugh at your expense while you sat there, face burning, wanting to disappear. Or maybe it was your parent. You did something wrong, something minor, and instead of handling it privately, they screamed at you in public, at the grocery store, at a family gathering, in front of your friends. They made sure everyone saw them tear you down, humiliate you, make you feel like nothing. Or maybe it was your siblings. They found that one thing you were sensitive about and they hammered it constantly. In front of everyone, your insecurities became their punchline. Your pain became their entertainment. And the worst part, nobody stopped them. The adults who should have intervened just stood there. Or worse, they laughed along. This is the kind of experience that fundamentally changes how you see social situations. Because now most group setting carries the threat of humiliation. Most conversation feels like it could turn into an ambush. Most laugh sounds like it might be at your expense. So you avoid these toxic people. You skip the parties, you eat lunch alone. You find ways to exist without putting yourself in situations where you could be humiliated again. And people think that's a problem. They think you're the problem. They never consider that maybe you're just protecting yourself from people who've proven they can't be trusted with your vulnerability. Now we need to talk about something that doesn't fit into a neat little story. Something that doesn't have a beginning, middle, and end. Complex trauma, or what therapists call CPTSD. This isn't about one bad thing that happened. This is about living in an environment where bad things happened constantly, where you never felt safe, where your entire childhood was just one long exercise in survival. Maybe your caregivers were emotionally unpredictable, loving one day, cold the next. You never knew which version of them you'd get. So you learned to read micro-expressions, to gauge moods, to become hypervigilant just to avoid triggering their anger or disappointment. Or maybe you were neglected. Not the dramatic kind where you didn't have food or shelter, the invisible kind, where your physical needs were met, but your emotional needs were completely ignored. You had a roof over your head, but no one to talk to. You had food on the table, but no one who cared how you felt. This kind of trauma is insidious because it doesn't look dramatic from the outside. There are no bruises, no broken bones. Just a kid who learned way too early that they couldn't depend on anyone, that their feelings didn't matter, that asking for help meant weakness. And what happens to that kid when they grow up? They become adults who can't trust anyone, who can't ask for help, who manage everything alone because they learned that relying on others only leads to disappointment. They become loners, not by choice but by conditioning, and their nervous system, that primitive part of their brain that's designed to keep them safe, is stuck on high alert. Always scanning for danger, always prepared for things to go wrong, always exhausted from the constant vigilance. Because when you grow up never feeling safe, you don't just get over it when you move out. Your body remembers. Your nervous system remembers. And it keeps protecting you the only way it knows how, by keeping everyone at a distance. Here's what people don't understand about all these experiences: the criticism, the shame, the betrayal, the bullying, the chaos, the humiliation, the long-term trauma. They don't go away. You don't just heal and suddenly become comfortable in social situations. You don't just move on and forget what it felt like to be humiliated, betrayed, or constantly judged. These experiences live in your body, in your nervous system, in the way you automatically tense up when someone raises their voice, in the way you scan people's faces for signs of disapproval, in the way you keep conversations surface level, because going deeper feels like handing someone ammunition. And people who've never experienced this, they look at you and think, you're just shy or unfriendly. They have no idea that your brain is running 1,000 calculations every time when you're around people. Is this person safe? What do they want from me? How long before they hurt me? What will it cost me to let them in? They don't know that what looks like preference for solitude is actually a highly sophisticated survival mechanism that you developed to protect yourself from further harm. They just think you're weird. But here's what they're missing. You're not weird, you're a warrior. You survived things that would have broken other people. You navigated impossible situations with impossible people, and you came out the other side. Maybe not unscathed, nobody comes out of trauma unscathed, but you came out alive. You learned to protect yourself when nobody else would. You learned to find peace in solitude when the world felt like chaos. You learned to trust yourself when everyone else proved they couldn't be trusted. That's not a personality flaw. That's strength that most people can't even develop. Most people have the luxury of assuming people are good until proven otherwise. You had to learn the opposite, that people are potentially dangerous until they prove they're safe. And you know what? That kept you alive. Most people can relax in social situations. You had to stay vigilant. And that vigilance, that constant scanning, that hyper-awareness, it's exhausting. But it's also what protected you. Most people don't understand why you prefer being alone. But you know that being alone isn't lonely when the alternative is being surrounded by people who don't see you, don't understand you, or worse, who actively hurt you. The truth about healing. So let's talk about what healing actually looks like for people like us. It doesn't look like suddenly becoming extroverted. It doesn't look like forcing yourself into social situations that trigger your trauma. It doesn't look like pretending to be comfortable when your body is screaming danger. Healing looks like honoring what you've been through. It looks like understanding that your preference for solitude isn't a problem. It's a solution you created to keep yourself safe. It looks like being selective about who gets access to you. Not because you're being difficult, but because you've learned that not everyone deserves your energy, your time, your vulnerability. It looks like building a relationship with yourself that's stronger than any external relationship could ever be, because you learned the hard way that the one person you can always count on is you. And yes, sometimes healing looks like being alone, because healing requires space, it requires silence. It requires the ability to hear your own thoughts without someone else's voice, someone else's criticism, someone else's judgment, someone else's expectations, drowning them out. When you started doing this, when you started prioritizing your healing over other people's comfort, they probably worried about you. But you were healing, and those are two completely different things. Here's the fundamental problem with how society views loners. They equate alone with lonely. They assume that anyone who chooses solitude must be suffering. They can't comprehend that for some of us, solitude isn't deprivation, it's liberation, because they've never had to learn what you learned. They've never had to calculate the risk of every human interaction. They've never had their trust weaponized against them. They've never been humiliated so thoroughly that group settings feel like potential war zones. So when they see you choosing to be alone, they think you need help. They think you need to get out more and make friends and stop being so isolated. What they don't understand is that you're not isolating from connection. You're protecting yourself from harm. And there's a massive difference. You'd love real connection. The kind where you don't have to perform or pretend. The kind where you can be vulnerable without it being used against you. The kind where people see you, really see you, and don't try to change you or fix you or criticize you into being someone else. But that kind of connection is rare. And until you find it, solitude is the safer bet. And that's not something to pathologize, that's wisdom earned through pain. You want to know what real freedom looks like? It looks like someone who doesn't need other people's validation to know their worth. Someone who can sit in a room full of people and feel perfectly comfortable leaving. Someone who's done the work to understand that their preference for solitude isn't a flaw, it's a feature. That's what trauma survivors who became loners have that others don't. The ability to choose themselves first, without guilt, without shame, without needing anyone's permission. And that terrifies people, because someone who doesn't need validation can't be controlled. Someone who's comfortable alone can't be manipulated through fear of loneliness. Someone who's built a strong relationship with themselves doesn't need to be saved. And that's the real reason society has a problem with loners. Not because they're broken, but because they're free in a way most people never will be. They're free from the exhausting need to be liked by everyone. Free from the performance of pretending to enjoy things they hate. Free from toxic relationships they're maintaining just to avoid being alone. That kind of freedom is revolutionary, and it makes people uncomfortable. So here's what changes everything. The moment you stop apologizing for being a loner. The moment you stop explaining yourself to people who will never understand. The moment you realize that your solitude isn't something that needs fixing, it's something that saved your life. That's when you step into your power. But here's what nobody tells you. You don't owe anyone access to you. You don't owe anyone your energy, your time, your presence. You don't owe anyone an explanation for why you choose peace over chaos, solitude over performance, authenticity over acceptance. Society will try to guilt you about this. People will call you selfish. But here's the truth they don't want you to know. Maybe they're the ones who need to look inward. Maybe they're the ones who can't sit with silence because it forces them to face what they've been running from. Maybe they're the ones who are uncomfortable, constantly seeking external validation because they never learned how to find peace within themselves. And maybe, just maybe, your ability to be alone is the sanest response to a world that taught you that people are dangerous. The strength they'll never see. Let's be absolutely clear about something. The strength it takes to become comfortable being alone after what you've been through. Most people will never understand it. They'll never know what it's like to have your trust shattered so completely that you had to rebuild your entire sense of safety from scratch. They'll never know what it's like to be criticized so constantly that you had to learn to validate yourself because no one else would. They'll never know what it's like to be betrayed so deeply that you had to become your own best friend just to survive. They'll never know what it's like to be humiliated so publicly that you had to develop an entirely new relationship with vulnerability. They'll never know what it's like to grow up in chaos and have to create your own peace because nobody else would provide it. And because they'll never know, they'll never celebrate the warrior you had to become. But you know what it took. You know the nights you cried yourself to sleep. You know the years you spent thinking something was fundamentally wrong with you. You know the battle you fought just to get to a place where you could look at yourself in the mirror and think, I'm okay on my own. That's not weakness. That's not antisocial behavior. That's not something to fix. That's resilience. That's strength. And if other people can't see it, that's their limitation, not yours. The world needs people who aren't afraid to stand alone, who trust their own judgment more than the crowd's opinion, who know that real strength isn't about how many people you surround yourself with. It's about how comfortable you are when everyone else leaves. You're not broken. You're a warrior. You survived things that would have destroyed others. You built a life for yourself, despite everything working against you. You learned to find peace in solitude when the world told you that being alone meant being wrong. And warriors don't need permission to choose themselves. So to everyone reading this who's ever been called too quiet, too distant, too unsocial, too much of a loner, you're not alone in being alone. There are millions of us out there, quietly living our lives, finding peace in solitude, and refusing to apologize for it anymore. Your trauma doesn't define you, but your survival does. Your ability to protect yourself does. Your wisdom does. Your strength does. And that's worth celebrating. See you in the next one. Keep being the warrior, my friends.